First off, I am incredibly nervous, and I don't know why. I've spoken before, but for some reason, I'm really nervous today. So, you know, take it easy on me. You're doing great. Thank you. I'm doing great. Thank you. Yes, thanks. Public affirmations. I'm also incredibly excited, though. This is a topic that I've had thoughts about rolling around in my head for a while, and I'm really excited to have gotten it out and to share them, and I hope that it doesn't suck. So, show of hands, how many people have used presenters in your Rails applications before? Wow, so like a third of the audience. That's terrific. All right, let's go ahead and start. This is me. You may have seen me online, or not. It's okay if you haven't. My name is Mike Moore, and I go by the handle Blomage, or you can call it Blomage. It doesn't really matter as long as you can spell it correctly. First off, I have a small disclaimer. Rails is a big tent. We have lots of divergent ideas within the Rails community. We have test unit, and we have RSpec. We've got ERB, and we've got HAML. And so what I'm going to show is one approach, right? There are flaws in it, like there are flaws in everything. So you don't need to be that guy who calls out every little trade-off. Be nice, please. And also, I'm going to try to show a lot of code, although I'm looking through my slides and I'm nervous I'm not showing enough code. So you may have to squint to see the code. So move on up if you can still. All right, first off, I believe presenters should ease pain. Presenters are a more advanced approach within your Rails applications, and they're specifically to solve a problem. And if you don't have that problem, then you probably shouldn't use them. Presenters are not something you should use early. You shouldn't be looking as you're developing your application for when you should use a presenter. It's my firm belief in pain-driven development that you only do something new outside of the typical approach when you feel pain. Because if you don't follow that, then you're going to be part of the problem. And before I get and talk about presenters, I want to share with you my pain. So I want to tell you a story. Recently, where I was working at the time, had a developer join the team. And he's a pretty good developer. He's familiar with Rails. And he was given a task to change some display on the website. It was in the dashboard, which is kind of like one of the home pages for users. Now, the app at the time that we were working on was a really important app, right? And because it was so important, oh, I can't move that. All my notes are gone. The developers who wrote the app originally demanded an advanced approach for dealing with the view. And so, you know, they built this approach. They called it components. And in their mind, they were years ahead of everyone else, right? Like, when they built this, in a few years, everyone would be doing this. So they built it. So this new developer, he goes off and he wants to change the dashboard. So he goes to the dashboard index template. And this is all he finds, is render component. And he thinks, well, that's kind of odd. OK, well, that's all right. Let's go ahead and let's look into the application controller and see if we can see where that's defined. And sure enough, in application controller, we find render component. But this component renders a partial shared component. And it passes in the component as the argument. All right, that's cool. We can do that. So they go to the shared component. And I kid you not, this is the moment they asked for help, right? Seriously, why? Like, does anybody have any ideas what's going on here? All right. It's actually in a helper. And because of the scoping, the helper is getting called within the templates and not the application. So, OK, good. We're back on track, right? We've got some help. At this point, I knew it was going to happen, so I kind of just sidled along and went for the ride. In our render component, we get an object. And if that object doesn't exist, then we just return a string. If it does exist and it has a render method, then we're going to go ahead and call that method, passing ourselves the template to that render method. Otherwise, we're just going to call toString on it and be on our way. Now, pretty much every component has a render method, so we immediately start looking at, well, what actually is this object? It might be a good idea to go back up to the dashboard controller and see exactly what is being put in this component variable. So we go to our dashboard controller, and sure enough, here's our @component ivar, and we're getting it from this dashboard component builder object. We're calling build on the builder, and we're giving it the current user. All right, so now there's a builder involved. Not a component, but a builder. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. We look at our dashboard component builder, and sure enough, here's our build method. It's passing in a user. All right, that's pretty cool. Now this dashboard is going to go and it's going to get a list of posts, recent posts, from the looks of it, off of the user. And then there it is, our dashboard component thing, finally, right? All right, so we know our dashboard component has like post items, and then it's got some author status component. Not sure what that is, but we know that the change we want to make is in the display of the posts on the dashboard. So we're just going to look at the post item component builder. So we've got a builder calling a builder. And when it's calling this post item component builder, it's not calling build like the other builder that we just saw that we're in. It's actually calling build list. So hopefully we'll see a build list. So we open up. And also the thing I want to note here is that our component builder, they're all in lib right now. So just make a note of where they're at. So we find our post item component builder. Remember, we're looking for build list. We don't see build list, but we do see build. And we're thinking that's probably useful because build is probably getting used. It's probably some convention. So build is going to take a single post. We're going to go ahead and we're going to generate a whole bunch of stuff off of this post. We're going to look for a description. We're going to look for like a view count. We're going to change that to be called views. We're going to have another variable for comments. So we're kind of like going up and down the domain hierarchy, pulling some data out specifically for this component. So we're good to go, but there is still no build list. And I wonder where that's defined. I'm guessing it's going to be defined in the component builder that our post item component builder in the lib directory is inheriting from. Now notice where component builder lives. It's no longer in lib. Now it's in app components. Not sure why, but there it is. We found it. And there is our build list. So it looks like build list is going to check to see if if we respond to build, we're going to call it. So this is great. We're going to take all of our items. We're going to call a post item component for each post that we're given. Otherwise, we're going to raise an exception. OK, so we're good to go. Let's go back to the post item component builder. We've got a lot of stuff going on here, right? But at some point, we're going to build a new post item component, which is what we're looking for, right? We want something that has a render call, and we're hopeful that our post item component object has indeed a render call. So let's look for that. Again, post item lib component builder is in library. Post item component is in app components, of course. Now, we don't actually have a real implementation. We're just taking a constant and setting it equal to some new object that is getting defined off of partial component. We have a string, and then we've got a bunch of symbols. So obviously, no render call here. Let's go ahead and look at partial component. I'm hoping here that we're going to get a render call. I don't see a render call right off the bat. But actually, OK, these guys were smart. This is metaprogramming. And this is incredibly difficult to understand. So yeah, this is really important in your app. And it's so important, they're going to go ahead and they're going to dynamically create a new class. And in that class, they're going to, if you look at the second define method, they're going to define the render method right there. So we're good to go. So now we've defined off of partial component that's going to build a new class. And so going back to our post item component is now a class, all right? It's not a class in the way that we typically see it, but it's still a class. And we know, going back here, that we've got a locals method, and that's going to be like all of those symbols that get passed in, and it's going to have a render call. So we're good to go. We know that render is going to be using the very first thing that was passed to define, right? So again, on line 2, in define, we're going to send in that partial string, and then we're going to have all of the variables. So let's go back and look at our post item component. Sure enough, we've got the partial string and then a whole bunch of symbols. Okay, good deal. Now, remember, we're going to call that render, and it's going to like do that binding and actually render a partial. Well, here's where we're getting our partials. So now, okay, I think we have it. We're going to go ahead and we're going to look in posts/post item, looking for a partial there. And we find it, but it's in Haml. And I hate Haml, right? And so it just keeps getting better and better and better. Now remember, this was his second day at the company. So welcome to the team, right? You're going to be very productive in our code base. Won't someone please think of the new developers? And I'm not talking about newbies, right? We should think about the newbies. I'm talking about people who are not familiar with your application. This is a hairball, right? There's no excuse for this. This is complete and total hostility towards people unfamiliar with your app. There is an overhead to going outside of what Rails or any framework will give you by default, right? So if you're going to, pick some advanced approach to try and, move some complexity around within your application, please be very cognizant of the trade-offs you are making. It's terrible. In my opinion, you should only use presenters when the pain that the presenters solve is exponentially more, or that the oh man, see, I'm nervous. I told you guys I was nervous. What's that? All right, yeah, we're good to go. Yeah, so you want more benefit than the cost, right? There's going to be a maintenance cost. You want more benefit. Now, I firmly believe that the view in your model view controller in Rails apps is a total bike shed, right? Does anybody else share that view, that the view is a bike shed? I'll tell you why I believe this. Because a bike shed is when you have a lot of people who are going to be arguing about some cosmetic detail of what's actually going on, but it doesn't have any real bearing on the system as a whole. And so you expend an awful lot of energy, right? A lot more heat than light discussing these details when the things that really matter to the application, the things kind of maybe more on the back end or more germane to the actual user experience, are ignored, right? And the thing is that pretty much once you get familiar with Rails, you can have an opinion on the view. And so we like to argue about the view quite a bit. So fair warning, working in the view, arguing about the view, trying new things in the view, it's a total bike shed. And when you do something new, again, hostility towards developers on your team. So that said, let's look at kind of a typical summary example for presenters. So here's some, well, I want to say here's some good code, but there's still some more bad code. All right, so let's say for the instance, you've got a site that you've got some content that users are creating, and somewhere in your navigation, you've got a partial that's going to just render some author details, right? Now, this is going to be on your navigation. It's going to be used on every single page on the entire site, right? It's either in the header or it's in the footer. And you need to grab out information about whoever the current user is and display that. So this is a really common approach, and I see this a lot in Rails applications. This is just a partial, right? So you could be showing foos or widgets or whatever, but we know that we have a current user, and if we have a current user, we're going to display this information. So first off, we're going to get all the count of the posts and the videos, add them together, and we're just going to show that in a list item for published content. And then we're going to look for unpublished posts and unpublished videos, and if you have any of those, we're going to show that in a list item for drafts or unpublished posts. And because I couldn't fit it all on the same page and I wanted to leave the bottom third free for everybody, there's more. If you're an admin, then what we're going to do is we're going to go to like the organization or the site that that user belongs to, and we're going to look for all of the unapproved posts that are not yet out there, and we're going to go ahead and display that. And maybe we can display a link, but I didn't want to clutter it, right? So we're just showing counts. Now, if your count is 0, then we're not going to show anything, right? So has anybody seen this approach before in your Rails views? Okay, good. In your templates. This is like nails on chalkboard, right? This like makes my teeth hurt. I don't like this. But we're kind of out of solutions. Like, what are you going to do, right? I mean, so let's throw some ideas out. How do you typically solve this? You've got like all these accessors. They're going out. They're iterating over your models in a partial. How do you not do that in your templates? What do you normally do? Anybody? Yeah. You put it in the model. Yeah, absolutely. So we could do that, right? But like, what needs this, really? Does anybody in your domain really need to know the published count of posts and the unapproved count or draft count of posts? I mean, is there any reason for your domain to have this complexity in it? I mean, I don't know. My user model does an awful lot, and this just seems like, you know, like a straw that would break the camel's back. For example, your domain models are used in a variety of places. Let's say that you've done a really good job and you've extracted all of your domain models into an engine, and you're sharing that engine across maybe your administrative site and then your administrative application, your customer application, and then you're also using that for like your background jobs as well, right? Does your administrative site really need these methods on the user, or does your background job really need this, right? This isn't really domain logic. This is really kind of a front-end presentation logic here, right? So I posit that the user model is not a good place for this. We shouldn't be just jamming stuff in the user model. Okay. Alternatively, we could create some other thing that could host this. And we'll go ahead and throw it in lib for now. This is just an author summary, right? The author summary takes an author, takes a user, and it knows how to query that user to find this information. Now, what we have here is a new entity within our application that can own this behavior. But more than that, we have something new that we can test without confusing the rest of user, right? And then our front-end presentation can go ahead and take use of this. And I kind of like this approach. This is typically when people talk about a presenter, this is what they're talking about. Talking about something else that knows about your models that can present it in such a way that your templates are expecting. So let's take a look at how we can use that. Let's go back to our shared partial. Let's go back. This is what it was before, right? So we're pulling out publish count, we're pulling out draft count, we're pulling out approval count if we're admin. Here was the object that we've created, the class we've created. Now here's the partial, and it all fits on one screen now, which is kind of nice. I like it when we can remove code by refactoring. So now our partial goes ahead and it creates a new author summary for the current user. And then it's going to query that summary for publish count, for draft count, and approval count. Now we don't care whether or not the user is an admin in this partial. We just need to know whether or not we're supposed to show this list item. The logic for whether or not to show the approval count, remember, is back here in this presenter, right? If we're not author admin, then we're just going to return 0. And if we're 0, then we're not going to display that interface. So this is nice. Now what we've done is we've created a contract for our templates to expect, and we've taken all of the behavior and put it somewhere else. It's not in the templates. And that's really important to me, because as your team grows, you're going to find that there are more people that are going to be in your templates than just developers. You're going to have the designers that are in your templates who are trying to maybe change the DOM structure around to get CSS to work. You've got like the user interface consultant who doesn't really code and doesn't really do design work, but he's in there mucking around anyway, right? So there you go. So I like this approach. Now, we don't need to do this ourselves. There are libraries that will help us to build these. Draper is one, which I think probably most of us have heard of. There's another one called Active Decorator, which is by, is it Akira Matsuda? I forget his surname or whatever. But this is a really, really terrific decorator library. I really like it a lot. This is what the user decorator would look like here, right? So it looks pretty much the same, except for we're not passing in the user. It's just kind of found it by itself in some way. Not really sure how. It's not a class anymore. It's a module, which is fine because we can still unit test a module without doing a full integration test. And if we look at our template, it's actually smaller because we're not creating that presenter, that author summary. We're just going to use current user. Now, the way this works is that every time you have an instance variable that's passed in to a view, whether by a render or through a partial render, what this library does is it looks at the class name and it looks for that class name decorator, right? And if it finds that, if that constant exists, it just includes it on the object, right? So here we get to define application-specific logic for our models without actually putting it on our model. Again, in the case where you've got a Rails engine on an admin interface, on a customer application, and then also on your back-end jobs, not all of those applications need this logic. This is really specific to the front end of this application, so we just put it on the front end, and we leave it off of our model. So, yay, it helped, right? Isn't that cool? Yes. All right. Begging for applause. I love it. All right, so let's look at another example. Typically, when people talk about presenters, serialization always comes up as well. So we look at our post controller. Again, we've got our current user. User has many posts. We're going to go ahead and show this post. And then if we're in the HTML format, we're going to let the template just use it. Otherwise, if we're doing JSON, we're going to actually render our post as JSON. Now, when we do this, the render is going to call .toJSON on the object, and it's going to return a hash that then gets serialized to JSON and then return back to the user. But if we want to change that, what we'd have to do is we'd have to say JSON.post.toJSON and then add that hash of what the structure is we want it to be. And that's kind of a pain. There are ways around it. You can have private methods that define that hash structure for how you're going to serialize, and I've used that before. Another thing is people are starting to use actual templates to define the structure of the JSON. So you've got JBuilder, and here I'm showing Rabble, which is kind of cool. So we say our object here is a post. We want the ID and the title attributes, and then we want author name, but we want it to be called author within our JSON. And then if the current user is an admin, we're going to have a couple other pieces of information. We're going to go ahead and expose the view count, and then we're going to expose the popularity index as views and popularity, right? Okay. Wow, it is hot up here. So Rabble is kind of cool, but I look at this and I think, how am I going to test this, right? And the only way to test this is to do an integration test. So in my integration test, I need to set up a controller. I need to invoke this action with the proper format. I need to render this template given an object. Then I need to parse the results of that rendering in JSON. And then I need to go ahead and do all my asserts on that structure. right? So if it comes back as author name and not author, then I have to go through all of that in order to know whether or not this worked. That's an awful lot of work, and I don't want to do that much work just to write the test, right? This is one of those things, if I'm starting out and I need to serialize something, I don't want to build this, because this is a pain to test. So we can use another presenter type approach. With that template example, you can actually just drop the rendered JSON as well, because it'll get caught by the template. It'll use that template for you. All right. What we can do is we can create a new class, a new object here, that's going to be a serializer. We're going to go ahead and take the post and whatever the current user is, because we need the current user to determine whether it's an admin. And if it is an admin, then we're going to show a little bit different data. So we get our post, we get our user, we call toJSON on this, and if we're the admin, we're going to get the full detail. Otherwise, we're just going to get the summary. And then there you can see the definition of full detail and summary. If you're in the back, you probably have a hard time seeing summary. It's just a hash, don't worry about it. Using this is pretty easy. We don't really change our controller that much. In our JSON format, we just create the new serializer, and we call toJSON on it, right? And this is a really great approach. If you're doing a lot of different types of serialization, let's say maybe you've got like different versioned APIs, and you want to return a different structure to the different versions of the APIs, this is a terrific approach. Not only can you vary the format of the data that's being passed back, but you can test it, and you can unit test it. And that's the greatest thing, right? Because those tests are going to be fast, right? It's also simple. You can just look at this implementation, and you can pretty much follow that. You know what that's doing, right? It's not all hidden around, right? There's another really terrific library called Active Model Serializers. And I love this, right? We can do the same type of thing, but we can use this library, and it cleans up our approach just a little bit. We create our post serializer, but now we're going to inherit from the active model serializer. And then we have our attributes. We have our author name being mapped to author, our view count and popularity index being mapped to views and popularity. And even though we're not passing in user, we have user available as scoped. And this is one of the things that active model serializer will do. It'll go out and grab the current user of the current web request and give it to you as the scoped variable. That's pretty sweet, right? And also, looking at this DSL looks a lot like the Rabble template too. So if you like Rabble because you think it's more readable, the serializer looks really similar, but you can also unit test it. Our post controller is, actually we're back at where we started, right? We're not really invoking that serializer, and it's because what active model serializer does is it looks for the rendering of JSON, and instead of calling toJSON on the object, what it'll do is it'll look for that, again, that class name prepended with serializer. If it finds a constant with that, then it's just going to go ahead and use that API on that constant. So this is a really neat indirection. We can create our serializers, and then we don't have all this kind of like injection code to use them. So it's pretty cool. I like it. And this is, I think, where most people stop with presenters. But I hope I'm not alone. Is that all? Is this really what presenters are for? Is this why you guys are here? Is this really the problem you're having? Are you having a problem serializing your models into JSON? Or are you really, in your complex views, are you having problems with having to put lookups on your user model to find posts in some navigation element somewhere? I mean, is that really the end of it? This isn't for me. If I look at the applications that I've worked on over the last years, the problems I've had in the view are not because of this. The problems I have are because of just the complexity inherent in the view layer, right? The view does an awful lot. There's a lot of complex behavior in some of the views that I've worked on, and this doesn't really solve my problems for me. So maybe let's take a step back. Now, it's really hard to have a definition of presenter, and this has been a hotly debated topic over the last year or two. Does anybody have a good definition for presenter that they can share with us? Like, what is it? Yeah. An object that groups together objects to present them. Okay, anybody else? All right. I guess it lets your model be, or your views be dumb. Lets your views be dumb. I like that, yeah. That's what I'm going for. That's how I judge whether or not a presenter is being helpful, is how dumb my templates can be. All right, so let's take a look at some design patterns, right? We already talked about this before, the decorator, right? This is actually a gang of 4 design pattern. The definition of this design pattern is it attaches additional responsibilities to an object dynamically. Decorators provide a flexible alternative to subclassing for extended functionality. Well, that's kind of cool. That's actually what we did. We didn't really subclass our post model, right? We dynamically added new functionality, either by creating a new wrapper proxy object, or by dynamically injecting a module into that object and using that functionality. So that sounds like what we've shown so far. There's another pattern, though, in the gang of 4 called the mediator. Now, the definition of this is it will define an object that encapsulates how a set of objects interact. Mediator promotes loose coupling by keeping objects from referring to each other explicitly, and lets you vary their interaction independently. Now, this actually sounds more like the problems I have in some of my complex views, right? I would love to not have these concerns being laid out explicitly in my templates, right? I've got a bunch of objects, they need to interact together to get some sort of behavior that my application is looking for. A mediator seems like it could be a good fit. Now, in practice, not every presenter is a mediator, and not every mediator is a presenter, but I think we're getting closer. So we have a spectrum. So we have a double jazz hand spectrum, okay? Anybody who knows me knows that this is coming, and I apologize to everybody. All right, we have a presenter spectrum. On one end, we've got the models, right? On the other end, we've got the view. We're in a model view controller framework, right? We've got models and we've got views. The presenters can go anywhere in between models and views. On the one end, you have a decorator. A decorator is specific to a model. A decorator is not going to decorate more than one model at a time. Now, we've got something else. The thing that I'm looking for is more on the presenter side, or more on the view side, right? Now, I may be kind of old and heretical, but 5 years ago, that was called presenters. And they're not really called presenters anymore. So now we have a spectrum, kind of like autism, right? You can be on the spectrum but not actually have autism. You can have some other thing. That's how presenters are to me, just like autism. All right. So let's take a step back and go back to where this idea of presenters came from originally within the Rails community. It comes from a blog post by Jay Fields where he calls out the presenter pattern as it specifically relates to Rails. Now, if you click on this link in this article, he calls out Martin Fowler's work on Martin Fowler's Blicky about the enterprise application architecture work that he had. And what Martin was doing was he was taking notes on some of these patterns that didn't make it into his book. And then I hope that most everybody's familiar with the enterprise application architecture book. This is the book that David Hammer Hansen followed when he created Rails. This is why we have a library called Active Record, because Active Record was in this book, all right? So on his Blicky, there's a page on a pattern called a presentation model. Now, this presentation model has a description. It may interact with several domain objects, but presentation model is not a GUI-friendly facade to a specific domain object. Instead, it is easier to consider presentation model as an abstract of the view that is not dependent on a specific GUI framework. While several views can utilize the same presentation model, each view should require only one presentation model. In the case of composition, a presentation model may contain one or many child presentation model instances, but each child control will also have only one presentation model. So that actually seems a little bit closer to the view side of the spectrum. And in fact, on Jay Fields' blog, he even makes this statement, paraphrased, that the presentation is a representation of the state of the view, right? So I posit that a true presenter is a presentation model, or as close as we can get to within the Rails community. If you've been in the .NET world, you may have heard of it as a view model, or if you've done anything in Mustache or Handlebars, you've got your view model, right? We're basically talking about the same thing. We've got an object whose responsibility is to represent the state and behavior of the view, right? And we bind that to our template to get the behavior we're looking for within our application. So let's take a look at a slightly better example. I don't have much time left, so I'm going to go a little bit quickly. Has anybody seen code that looks like this? Does this like just make your eyes hurt? Believe it or not, I actually had to clean this up an awful lot. Originally, I pulled this off of an open source Rails project, and there were no partials, and so I had to like look at what the actual HTML was doing, give it a name, and then put a render partial call in there. And actually, it's only by doing that that I could figure out what those conditionals are doing. We've got like these three main conditionals where we're looking at a course object, we're asking if it's available, whether self-enrollment returns a truthy value, and whether open enrollment returns a truthy value. And we either don't have a course enrollment object or it's not active. If all of those conditions are met and we don't have some value jammed into our session list, then we're going to go ahead and render some join course user interface, right? Same type of thing. If we have an enrollment and it's active and you can self-enroll, and we don't have that weird session thing, which I'm not really sure what that session thing is doing, then let's go ahead and render the drop course partial. Otherwise, we're going to pull that value out of the session, and we're going to like display some temporary access interface. So again, this is hopefully not unheard of. I hope that I'm not the only one who has worked on piece of crap applications, right? This is terrible, and it's par for the course, unfortunately. This is how I would love for it to be, right? I want a single object that represents my view, and I just want to say, dude, can I show the join course interface? Yes, of course you can. Here are the objects that you're going to bind to your partial. Can I show the drop course? Yeah, here are the objects. Should I show that we have temporary access? Yeah, you should. Okay, render that partial. This is a dumb template. Now, if I'm a designer, or if I work with a designer, I'm going to be a lot more comfortable giving them access to this template than I would this template, because who knows what they're going to do on this template, right? So this is kind of my ideal. This is really what I want to get at. So how do we get there? Well, the first thing we can do is we can basically just copy all of this complexity out of the template and drop it in some new object, right? We can also do this with helpers, right? And there are a lot of like varying approaches on what you should use helpers for and what you shouldn't use helpers for. This is a presenters talk, so we're going to use presenters. Don't be that guy. All right, so we have all this logic about, again, same logic, whether we can join and we can't drop, whether we can drop, and whether we have temporary access. Now, I showed this to James Edward Gray, and he was just like, this is terrible. You don't need a presenter. You need an adequately modeled domain, right? And I agree with him. This is what it should look like, even in the presenter. We should ask our domain if this user can join the course. We should ask the domain if this user can drop the course. But there's something else going on here. This is not just whether or not you can add the course or whether you can drop the course. It's whether or not we're going to show this interface to the user, right? There's a wrinkle here. They may have some sort of temporary access. Who knows what this application is doing? They may be masquerading as the user with an admin or something, but the application is going to behave differently than what the domain is going to behave. We don't want to take these application concerns and jam them all the way deep into our domain, because this is a front-end thing only. So a presenter is a really good alternative here. Yes, you should model your domain objects so they make sense. 100% yes. But there is still a place for presenters, even if you model your domain perfectly. Again, this is how the view should look, right? I think it's pretty cool. I like it. All right, so that was a pretty good example. I think this is a better example, and I'm running out of time. So again, my apologies. I'm going to go over this pretty quickly. This is a website that I used to work on until very recently. There's a lot going on this homepage, right? An awful lot. There's a lot of data that's being presented, and there are actually some pretty sophisticated, complex rules for what is going to be displayed. But let's go ahead and focus on categories, right? How we're going to display categories when, and which categories we're going to display. So let's go ahead and crack open our partial, and on the sidebar, this is part of our sidebar. We've got a lot of code here, and I'm sorry for this. I'll step through it real quick. We have a current organization, which is the company whose account that the site is running on. We've got a current site, so organizations can have more than one site. So they sit on a subdomain. And then they've got users and content that exists within that site. The plan that an organization subscribes to, you can turn on, you can have features if you pay enough, or you can have the categories, and other features if you pay enough. So according to what your plan is, if you pay more, then you get more features turned on or off. Alternatively, on the site, you can disable features. So if your plan allows you to have categories, but on the site, you're like, man, I don't want to display categories. That's not what we're using the site for. You've got the kill switch here, so you can turn them off. So on our sidebar, we need to be an organization that has features, or has categories. The site needs to be able to display categories. And then we've got some more conditional stuff. If you're logged in, or if you're not logged in, but the current site wants you to show all categories, then we're just going to go ahead and ask the site for all the top categories, right? Which is all the categories sorted by how frequently they're used. Otherwise, if you are not logged in and you don't have this setting about showing all content, then we're only going to show the top public categories, and that means that we've got content that is specifically flagged for public consumption that you don't need to be authenticated in order to see. Now, we might have a lot different list of categories. The public content may only have 2 categories, whereas all content may have 20, right? And we only want to show the categories of the posts that user can see with their current authentication state. All right, so now we've got a list of categories. If we have any categories, let's go ahead and render the HTML snippet and bind to the partial, which is going to go and add a list item, right? Again, I hope this doesn't look like foreign. I see this all the time. What we can do is we can create a presenter that will encapsulate all of this information, and I only have 2 decision points. Do I show categories? And if so, what categories do I have? So let's just put that in the presenter. Do I show it? Well, if the organization has the feature and the site has the setting, and I've actually got some categories, then yes, display it. If I don't, if any of those are false or falsy, then no, we're not gonna display categories. So again, this was the original template. Here's the new template. If I show categories, then do it. If not, then don't. And those are the categories that I'm going to show. If the site wants to inflict like a maximum number of categories, we can put that in the presenter, and we can set that behavior in that object and not inflict it upon our template. Again, I will give this to my designer. Here's the presenter again. We can go a little bit further. Like our categories is a little messed up because we've got like 3 things going on. You can either be logged in, or you can be showing all content, or you're only showing the public content. Those are the 3 states. So we can refactor our presenter, but in the end, what we did is we just created 3 different presenters, right? Because we're doing this for everything on that homepage, for posts, for questions, for categories, for contributors, whether or not you're a current user and you've got onboarding steps, whether or not we've got calls to action. What we want is we want our presenter to tell the template whether or not to show something and not have the template determine whether or not to show something. So we created 3 different presenters, and we can unit test all of these. And these are all just objects, and those unit tests are fast. What I love about this, and the reason we did this, is because it's very important that we get this behavior right? And so now I've got something that is easily testable. Here's what the controller looks like. We just build our homepage presenter. We have that logic for which one we're going to use. We set current organization, site, and user, and we're good to go. And everything's tested. All right, so I really like this approach. Again, word of warning. If you open up your terminal and type in Rails new foo, do not start with presenters, right? This is an advanced approach that should be used when you feel pain. In our case, we had pain because we could not verify easily the behavior of the home page, and we had a lot of very important logic on the home page. I wanted some object that would represent that well and that I could test. So we went with presenters, and it was a terrific solution for that. But there is overhead, right? Hopefully it's not the same amount of overhead as the components were, right? Remember the components, like that huge dive to find some object that knew how to render itself? Like, what a waste. But there is overhead with dealing with presenters. So here's a tweet from James. I think code and presenter objects is some of the worst I see. I don't think that has to reflect on the pattern, but it is troubling. This is true, right? This is a 5% solution, not a 95% solution. Real quick, by the Rails view, this is fantastic. It really sets your approach to doing a maintainable view. I love this book. These guys are terrific. They talked about decorators and serializers, but not actual presenters. Maybe I'm off, but I think that's what a presenter is. It's a view model, and there's not really a whole lot that talks specifically to that. The other one, a book you should buy if you don't have and read on the airplane home, is Rails Anti-Patterns. Terrific book, a little bit older, but fantastic. Thank you very much. Oh, one more thing. Sorry, applause after I say this. You guys should like hire me and stuff because I lost my job like a week ago and I don't have a job. So I'm a pretty advanced, like I'm a good Rails developer. People say nice things about me. So if you're looking for someone, come talk to me. That's my website. Okay, any questions? Thank you.